Hey, my friend. Hello, everyone. Tonight, we embark on a journey through the dramatic and emotional chapters of America's history, where extraordinary individuals confront tragedy, power, and resilience. Does the death of Governor Eleanor Hawthorne conceal secrets beneath the white powder of authority? What pain has the journey of coffee, from sacred ritual to global commodity, hidden? The trail of tears along the Appalachian Mountains, where thousands of Shawnee fell, is it merely a historical scar or an unquenchable flame? And could the legal frenzy in New Orleans in 1890 resurface in our own era? Before we dive in, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment sharing where you're watching from and what time it is. I'm curious to know who's joining me in unraveling these mysteries. Dim the lights, play some soft ambient music, and let's step into tonight's story, where history isn't just the past, but a resonant voice echoing from the heart of America. In the winter of 1850, Boston trembled in skin-piercing cold. Fog draped the cobblestone streets, a veil concealing a city holding its breath. In the highest room of the Massachusetts State House, Governor Eleanor Hawthorne stood motionless, her weary gaze drifting through the misty window. At 68, she was the last remnant of the legendary Hawthorne family, a lineage that shaped history with stirring speeches at Faneuil Hall. But now, Eleanor was no longer that blazing fire. She was a fragile figure, cloaked in heavy black silk and a mask of white powder, hiding a heart on the verge of breaking. Eleanor was once an icon. In her glory days, she stood on a wooden platform at Faneuil Hall, her glossy brown hair flowing, her voice resounding like ocean waves, igniting faith in the crowds. She guided Boston through dark times, economic crises, political divides, and whispers against a female leader. The people called her the Queen of Boston, not for a crown, but for her iron will and blazing heart. Yet time, like a silent thief, had stolen that strength. Now, her hands trembled as she held a quill, and her eyes, once bright as torches, were clouded, lost in memories. She stood alone in that frigid room. Her bony fingers gripped the edge of the oak desk as if letting go would make her collapse. The white powder on her face, used to maintain a flawless image, cracked under the faint glow of a flickering candle. It was no longer armor, but a burden, a reminder that even Eleanor Hawthorne, the woman who made a nation bow, could not defy time. Her heart, once pounding with ideals, now sagged under invisible wounds. Each beat echoed loss, harsh decisions, and a loneliness no words could capture. Eleanor no longer stepped into Faneuil Hall. The cheering crowds were distant memories, replaced by the scrutinizing eyes of advisers and anxious whispers in the State House corridors. They saw her change. Gone were the confident smiles, the sharp commands. In their place was silence, a terrifying silence, as if she were preparing for something they dared not imagine. Eleanor knew they were waiting for her to speak of a successor, of Boston's future. But she couldn't. Words, her greatest weapon, were trapped in her throat, stifled by a nameless pain. That pain had a name. Caleb Thornton, her closest friend, her ally, the man she trusted more than herself. His image, warm smile, sharp eyes, still haunted her. But Caleb had betrayed her, and Eleanor, with a shattered heart, had signed the order sending him to the gallows. That decision didn't just kill Caleb, it killed a part of her soul. Every night, she saw him in her dreams, not the traitor, but the friend who shared grand aspirations. "Why, Caleb?" She wanted to scream, but only silence answered, and that silence was devouring her. Eleanor turned from the window, stepping slowly to a red velvet chair. She sat, not with a governor's majesty, but like someone on the brink of surrender. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers clasped tightly, clinging to what strength remained. Outside, Boston lived on, but for Eleanor, the world had shrunk to this room, an invisible prison holding her heart captive. She thought of her radiant days, standing before the people, promising a just and prosperous Boston. That promise she had kept, but at what cost? Loneliness. Sleepless nights, when memories of Caleb and harsh decisions screamed in her mind. The white powder on her face, once a symbol of power, now felt like an imprisoning mask. It hid wrinkles, time's scars, but couldn't conceal the truth. Eleanor was fading, not from age, not from illness, but because her heart was exhausted. She had fought too long against enemies, politics, herself. Now she only wanted rest. But rest, for Eleanor, was a luxury. Rest meant letting go of Boston, her legacy, herself. And that she couldn't do. She lifted her head, her gaze sweeping the room, pausing at a portrait on the wall. A youthful Eleanor, with a confident smile and blazing eyes. That painting was a reminder of who she had been, but also an accusation. "You've gone too far," it whispered. "You've lost yourself." Eleanor closed her eyes, drawing a deep, trembling breath, as if carrying the weight of a lifetime. She didn't know what this winter would bring, an end or a chance for redemption. But deep within, she felt a chilling truth. Her time was running out, and Boston, the city she loved more than life, would have to carry on without her. The room remained silent, save for the wind whistling through the door's cracks. Eleanor opened her eyes, her gaze no longer lost, but tinged with faint resolve. She would face her final days on her own terms, not as a queen, but as a human with a broken heart, yet not ready to surrender. In the dim office of the Massachusetts State House, Eleanor Hawthorne stood motionless, like a statue worn down by time. The faint light from an oil lamp on the desk illuminated the deep wrinkles etched into her face, once concealed by a layer of white powder. At 68, she was no longer the radiant flame that had once lit up Boston. Her heart, now, was a desolate wasteland where memories and pain screamed without end. Eleanor was retreating, not from politics, but from herself. She stood there, hour after hour, her weary legs refusing to buckle. Her frail fingers clung to the windowsill, as if trying to hold on to a world slipping from her grasp. Her gaze was lost, not on the Boston outside, the city she had devoted her life to protecting, but drifting through an irredeemable past. The image of Caleb Thornton emerged, vivid and heart-wrenching. Her closest friend, her ally, the man who once shared grand dreams of a just Boston. But Caleb had betrayed her, and Eleanor, with a shattered heart, had signed the order sending him to the gallows in 1848. That decision didn't just end Caleb's life, it tore her soul apart. That pain was an invisible knife, cutting deeper with every breath. Eleanor no longer ate. Silver trays of bread and steaming soup, carefully brought by Lady Clara, sat untouched on the desk, growing cold like her mind. She rejected all advice, all worried glances. "Leave me be," she had whispered, her voice fragile as smoke, forcing Clara to bow her head and depart. But Eleanor's silence was not peace. It was a storm, raging within, where guilt, regret, and loneliness intertwined. She wondered, could she have done differently? Could she have saved Caleb? Saved herself? But no answer came, only a darkness growing ever thicker. She stepped slowly to the oak desk, where stacks of letters and reports lay piled, coated in dust. Once, she had read every line, debated every idea. Now, Eleanor merely glanced at them as if they were written in a foreign tongue. Boston needed her. The advisors whispered this in the corridors, their voices thick with concern. They needed her to name a successor, to guide the city through turbulent days. But Eleanor couldn't. Words, her sharpest weapon, were trapped in her throat, crushed by an invisible weight. She was afraid, not of death, but of the moment she let go, when Boston, her life's child, would carry on without her. Afraid that her legacy, her years of sacrifice, would dissolve like the fog outside. Sometimes she lifted her head, her gaze resting on the silver mirror hanging on the wall. But she dared not look long. The face reflected was no longer the Eleanor Hawthorne of Faneuil Hall, with her confident smile and blazing eyes. It was a stranger, pale skin, clouded eyes, and cracked white powder like a shattered mask. She touched her cheek, feeling the chill of her flesh, and shuddered. That powder, used to hide her frailty, now felt like a curse. It reminded her that even the Queen of Boston was merely human, fragile as glass. Eleanor sat, the velvet chair creaking under her weight, not of her body, but of her soul. She clasped her hands tightly, nails digging into her palms, as if to hold on to what strength remained. In her mind, memories of Caleb returned relentlessly. His smile, his warm voice, the eyes that once made her believe they could change the world. But then, those eyes turned to betrayal, and that smile vanished beneath the guillotine's blade. "What have I done?" she asked herself, but dared not speak aloud. The guilt was too vast, too heavy, like a stone crushing her chest, making every breath painful. Her advisors, who once revered her, now tiptoed around her, as if afraid to shatter something delicate. They whispered of Boston's future, of political threats, of the need for a successor. But Eleanor didn't hear. Her ears echoed only with Caleb's footsteps to the gallows, the crowd's shouts, and the steel blade's fall. She closed her eyes, trying to banish the image, but it clung like an unbreakable curse. She wanted to scream, to shatter the silence, but her body had no strength left. Only tears, silently streaming down her cheeks, smudging the white powder. She opened her eyes, her gaze now carrying a profound sadness. Eleanor knew her time was running out. Not from illness, not from age, but because her heart was exhausted. She had fought too long, against enemies, politics, herself. And now she yearned for rest. But rest for Eleanor, was terrifying. It meant letting go of Boston, her legacy, the dreams she and Caleb had built together. And that she wasn't sure she could do. Outside, the fog still cloaked Boston, like a veil hiding the city's secrets. In the frigid room, Eleanor sat motionless, her hands still clasped. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, an end or a chance to face her pain. But deep within, she felt a chilling truth. Her decline was not just that of a person, but of an era. And Boston, with or without her, would have to find a way to move forward. The light faded in the long corridor of the Massachusetts State House, where laughter and spirited debates once echoed. Now, only the wind's howl through the door's cracks remained, like the whispers of an anxious Boston. In the most secluded room, Eleanor Hawthorne sat motionless by the fireplace, her small frame dwarfed by the flickering flames. At 68, the legendary governor of the Hawthorne family was no longer the guiding flame. She was a disintegrating shadow, imprisoned in her own silence, her heart weighed down by scars that could never heal. The State House, once vibrant as Boston's heart, now lay steeped in gloom, as if mourning its own glorious days. The lavish balls, where Eleanor once glided with regal poise, her black silk gown shimmering under chandeliers, had become distant memories. The lively meetings, where her sharp voice united factions, were now mere faint echoes. The corridors stood empty. Advisors, who once jostled for her counsel, now tiptoed, exchanging worried glances in the shadows. They felt it, the dissolution of their leader, not in death, but in the slow, agonizing retreat of an exhausted soul. Eleanor had pushed everyone away. Loyal aides, who once transcribed her every word, were dismissed with a weary shake of her head. "I don't need them," she whispered, her voice frail as a winter breeze. Only Lady Clara, her closest confidant, was allowed to stay. Clara, with her silver hair and gentle eyes, stood silently by the door, holding a tray of cold tea, not daring to speak. She wanted to say something, to pull Eleanor from the abyss, but the wall of silence Eleanor had built was too thick, too unyielding. Even Clara, who knew Eleanor better than anyone, couldn't break through. Each time Clara tried to touch her hand, Eleanor gently recoiled, her gaze lost, as if comfort were a luxury she didn't deserve. Eleanor sat by the fireplace, her gaunt hands resting on her lap, nails digging into her skin. Her lips moved faintly, not in prayer, but in a silent monologue with herself. What was she saying? No one knew. Perhaps they were apologies never voiced, meant for Caleb Thornton, the dear friend who betrayed her, the man she had sent to the gallows. Caleb's image, with his warm smile and sharp eyes, still haunted her, a relentless specter. Was I right? She asked herself, but the answer was only silence, pressing on her chest like a cold stone. That pain wasn't just loss. It was guilt. It was self-reproach. It was the persistent question. Could she have done differently? Saved him, saved herself. The fireplace crackled, but its warmth didn't reach Eleanor. She trembled, not from cold, but from a storm raging in her mind. She thought of Boston, the city she had devoted her life to building, She remembered the days at Faneuil Hall, when crowds cheered, calling her queen. But now, she was no queen. She was a weary woman, imprisoned by her own legacy. She was afraid that if she spoke, if she named a successor, Boston would forget her. Afraid that her years of sacrifice, her harsh decisions, would crumble like ashes in the hearth before her. And above all, she feared facing the truth, that her heart, once ablaze with ideals, had grown cold. Clara, standing in the shadows, quietly wiped a tear. She had seen Eleanor change. Gone were the confident smiles, the sharp commands. In their place was silence. A terrifying silence, as if Eleanor were preparing for a journey no one could join. Clara wanted to scream, to shake her awake, but she knew Eleanor no longer belonged to this world. Her soul had drifted, lost in a sea of memories and regret. Clara could only stand there, helpless, watching Boston's leader fade bit by bit. Eleanor lifted her head, her gaze resting on a wall-mounted clock. The hands moved slowly, each tick like a knife's stab. Time was abandoning her. She knew it. But she couldn't let go. Not now. Not when Boston still needed her, even if she lacked the strength to lead. She clasped her hands tightly, clinging to what will remained. But deep within, she felt a chilling truth. Her silence wasn't hers alone. It was the silence of an era closing, of a leader dissolving before those who once revered her. Outside, Boston lay shrouded in darkness, streetlights dim through the fog. In the frigid room, Eleanor remained still, her lips faintly moving. No one knew what she said, but perhaps it was a farewell, not to the world, but to the woman she once was. The State House stood silent, as if holding its breath. But Eleanor, with her broken heart, could only wait for one thing: the moment when the final darkness would embrace her. The private chamber of Eleanor Hawthorne, tucked deep within the Massachusetts State House, had become a fortress of solitude, where time seemed to stand still. The faint glow of a candle on the wooden table barely illuminated her frail silhouette, seated silently in a red velvet chair. At 68, Eleanor, the legendary governor of Boston, was no longer the unyielding symbol of power. She was a fading spirit, imprisoned in a weakening body and a heart riddled with wounds. As March 1850 arrived, darkness not only enveloped the room, but seeped into her mind, like a prophecy of a reign drawing to a close. Physicians were summoned, entering with black leather bags and anxious eyes. They gathered around her, voices low, hands trembling as they scribbled notes. But Eleanor only shook her head, her thin lips pressed tightly, refusing all treatment. "Leave me be," she whispered, her voice hoarse, as if each word drained the last of her vitality. Persistent coughs tore through her chest, each one a dagger, forcing Lady Clara, standing silently by the door, to turn away to hide her tears. Eleanor's skin, once masked by white powder, was now waxy and pale, faint blue veins visible beneath its fragile surface. But she allowed no one to touch her, no one to look too closely. The image of power she had built over a lifetime, the Queen of Boston, was the last thing she clung to, even as it was killing her. The chief physician, Dr. Samuel Gray, knelt beside her chair, his voice urgent. He spoke of Boston's cold air, of winter winds that may have sown the seeds of pneumonia in her lungs. "Pneumonia, madam," he whispered, as if afraid his words might make her vanish. But Eleanor didn't respond. Her gaze was lost, drifting past him as if staring into an endless void. Other doctors murmured of blood poisoning, a silent killer, perhaps from unnoticed small wounds or teeth weakened by time. But the most terrifying theory, whispered only in shadows, was mercury poisoning. The white powder she used daily, transforming her into an immortal icon, might have been silently poisoning her blood, gnawing at her body and mind. No one dared say it aloud. No one dared face the truth that Eleanor's mask of power might be her murderer. Eleanor knew she was fading. She felt it. Each breath was a battle, each heartbeat a reminder that her time was running out. But she didn't fear death. Not exactly. What she feared was surrender, letting go of Boston, her legacy, the dreams she and Caleb Thornton once shared. Caleb's image, with his warm smile and sharp eyes, still haunted her. The decision to send him to the gallows in 1848 didn't just kill her dearest friend. It killed a part of her soul. Could I have done otherwise? She asked herself. But the answer was only silence, pressing on her chest like a curse. That pain wasn't just regret. It was a slow-burning fire, consuming her from within, making her refuse all aid, as if enduring were her only way to atone. She sat there, hands clasped tightly on her lap, nails digging into her skin, as if clinging to the last of her resolve. The candle before her flickered, its light dancing across her face, highlighting wrinkles and cracked powder. She no longer looked in mirrors. She was afraid. Afraid to see a stranger, not Eleanor Hawthorne, the invincible governor, but a weary woman worn down by time and guilt. She closed her eyes, drawing a deep breath, but it trembled, carrying the scent of fireplace smoke and the bitter taste of despair. In her mind, Boston appeared. Its cobblestone streets, Faneuil Hall, the crowds that once cheered her name. But now, that city felt distant, like a dream belonging to someone else. Clara, standing in the shadows, stepped closer. She placed a hand on Eleanor's shoulder, gently, as if afraid to shatter something fragile. But Eleanor didn't respond. She only tilted her head slightly, as if comfort were a burden she couldn't bear. Clara stepped back, her eyes brimming with tears. She had seen Eleanor weaken, not just in body but in spirit. She knew the governor was no longer fighting for Boston. She was fighting herself, her guilt, her loss, her fear that her legacy would dissolve like the fog outside. Clara wanted to speak, to pull Eleanor back, but she could only stand silently, helpless, watching the woman who was once Boston's flame slowly fade. March arrived, bringing a harsher cold. Darkness cloaked the room, like a curtain hiding Eleanor's final truth. She sat motionless, lips pressed tight, as if guarding secrets she would take to the grave. The physicians whispered their goodbyes, leaving bottles of medicine on the table. Useless, untouched. No one knew what was truly killing Eleanor. Pneumonia, poisoning, or her broken heart. But deep down, they sensed a chilling truth. Eleanor's reign was ending, not in cheers, but in painful silence. And as that darkness thickened, it heralded not just the death of a woman, but the closing of an era. In the darkened chamber of the Massachusetts State House, Eleanor Hawthorne clutched a small silver ring, her frail fingers trembling under the faint glow of a candle. The ring, a gift from Caleb Thornton, was not merely a keepsake. It was a curse, an invisible thread binding her soul to days of anguish. At 68, Boston's legendary governor no longer battled politics or enemies. She fought herself, haunted by the specter of the dear friend who betrayed her, the man she was forced to send to the gallows. Caleb, with his warm smile and sharp eyes, was a wound that never healed, tormenting her final days. Caleb Thornton had once been Eleanor's closest companion. Together, they dreamed of a just Boston, standing side by side at Faneuil Hall, her resonant voice bolstered by his quiet confidence. He was the only one who truly understood her, not the Queen of Boston, but Eleanor, a woman burdened by power and loneliness. But in 1848, Caleb changed. Ambition twisted him into a traitor, weaving a political plot to overthrow her. When the truth unraveled, Eleanor faced an unbearable choice: forgive him or protect Boston. She chose Boston, but the cost was her heart, shattered like a crystal goblet crashing onto a stone floor. On the day Caleb ascended the gallows, Eleanor stood at a distance, hidden behind a curtain in the State House. She didn't want to look, yet she couldn't tear her eyes away. The crowd roared for justice, but to Eleanor, each shout was a dagger. Caleb held his head high, his gaze sweeping the mob, as if searching for her. And when the steel blade fell, she felt a piece of her soul die with him. "What have I done?" she whispered into the darkness, but no one answered. No one knew that the invincible governor was crumbling, that the decision didn't just kill Caleb, it killed her faith in herself. Now, Eleanor sat in silence, the silver ring glinting in her hand under the candlelight. She turned it, feeling its cool, etched surface, as if touching memories of Caleb. Each glance at the ring brought him back, not the traitor, but the friend who shared grand dreams. His smile, his warm voice, the eyes that once convinced her they could change the world. But then, those eyes turned to betrayal, and that smile vanished forever. "Why, Caleb?" She wanted to scream, but only silence replied. That silence was a storm, raging in her mind, carrying guilt, regret, and a pain too vast to name. She clasped her hands tightly, nails digging into her palms, as if to hold on to the last scraps of sanity. But sanity was losing. Each night, Caleb returned in her dreams, not to accuse, but to remind her of what was lost. She saw him at Faneuil Hall, waving her closer, but as she reached out, he dissolved, leaving her with emptiness. She woke drenched in cold sweat, heart pounding as if she'd run through a field of thorns. That pain wasn't just loss. It was a slow burning fire, consuming her from within, leaving her unable to eat, to sleep, to live. Eleanor stared at the ring, her eyes clouded with unshed tears. She wanted to hurl it away, to erase Caleb from her mind. But she couldn't. The ring was the last proof that she had loved, had trusted, had been human. If she let it go, she feared losing the last shred of her humanity. She feared becoming only the Queen of Boston, a cold symbol, heartless. Yet keeping it, she knew, was self-torture. Each touch of the ring brought the weight of guilt, not for executing Caleb, but for failing to save him, their friendship, herself. Lady Clara, standing silently by the door, watched Eleanor with sorrowful eyes. She had seen the governor transform from a formidable woman into a disintegrating shadow. Clara wanted to speak, to pull Eleanor from the abyss, but she knew Caleb was a specter no comfort could banish. She could only stand there, helpless, watching Eleanor sink deeper into pain. Clara stepped closer, placing a silk handkerchief on the table, but Eleanor didn't stir. She only gripped the ring tighter, as if it were the last thread tying her to the world. Outside, Boston lay cloaked in fog, streetlights dim like lost souls. In the frigid room, Eleanor sat motionless, her gaze fixed on the ring. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, an end or a chance to confront Caleb's ghost. But deep within, she felt a chilling truth. Caleb wasn't just the friend who betrayed her. He was the face of every loss, every harsh decision, every shattered dream. And that specter, she knew, would never leave her, not until her final breath faded away. In the shadowed chamber of the Massachusetts State House, Eleanor Hawthorne sat silently, her weary gaze fixed on a small silver mirror on the table. The face reflected was no longer Boston's legendary governor, but a pale specter, eroded by time and an invisible killer. At 68, Eleanor had vanquished every foe, but now she was losing to the very armor she once wore, the mercury-laced white powder she used to maintain a flawless facade. That mask of power, unbeknownst to her, was silently poisoning her blood, hastening the decay of a heart already fractured. Each morning, Eleanor performed the ritual, an unbreakable habit. She sat before the mirror, trembling hands holding a silver powder box, carefully applying smooth layers of white to her face. The powder hid wrinkles, time's blemishes, and the fragility she never wanted Boston to see. It transformed her into the Queen of Boston, unconquered, immortal, flawless. But now, as she gazed into the mirror, the cracked powder revealed waxy, pale skin, faint blue veins stark under the flickering candlelight. She trembled, not from cold, but from a truth creeping into her mind. The source of her strength might be the murderer killing her. Eleanor felt the decline. It didn't strike suddenly, but stole in quietly, like a thief gnawing at her body. Fatigue clung to her, not the exhaustion of long debates at Faneuil Hall, but a profound depletion, as if her soul were being drained. Her hands shook, too weak to hold a quill for signing vital documents. Her eyes, once torch-bright, were now clouded, lost in uncontrollable reveries. And her mind, oh, her mind, sank into a fog of despair, where dark thoughts whispered she was unworthy of Boston, that she had failed. Unbeknownst to her, these symptoms aligned perfectly with chronic mercury poisoning, an invisible killer her era didn't comprehend. Mercury, a word alien to Eleanor, but a deadly poison lurking in the white powder she used daily. In her glory days, that cosmetic was a symbol of power, the perfection a female leader like her had to uphold. No one questioned it. No one warned her. The physicians, with their black leather bags and anxious eyes, spoke only of pneumonia or blood poisoning, never daring to consider that the substance she applied to her face might be poisoning her blood, eroding her nervous system, and plunging her into the abyss of depression. Eleanor, who once commanded a city, was now a victim of the very mask she wore to conceal her vulnerability. She gripped the table's edge, nails digging into the wood, as if clinging to the last of her resolve. But that resolve was crumbling. Each breath was a battle, laced with the bitter taste of despair. She thought of Caleb Thornton, the dear friend who betrayed her, whom she was forced to execute. That pain alone was enough to destroy her, but now she wondered if Mercury had amplified it, turning sorrow into a monster devouring her mind. She recalled the days they stood together, dreaming of a just Boston. But now, those memories were distorted, as if Mercury poisoned not just her body, but the most beautiful parts of her soul. Eleanor closed her eyes, drawing a trembling breath. Caleb's image appeared, not his warm smile, but his final gaze on the gallows, not accusing, but pleading for forgiveness. "What have I done?" she whispered, her voice fragile as smoke. Tears streamed down, smudging the white powder, revealing the frail skin beneath. She wanted to wash it away, to erase the mask that imprisoned her. But she couldn't. The powder wasn't just cosmetic. It was her legacy, the symbol of an invincible leader, a woman who sacrificed everything for Boston. To abandon it, she feared, was to abandon herself. Lady Clara, standing silently in the corner, watched Eleanor with tear-filled eyes. She had seen the governor weaken in body and spirit. Clara knew about the white powder but dared not speak. She feared the truth would shatter Eleanor's last glimmer of hope. Clara stepped closer, placing a silk handkerchief on the table, but Eleanor didn't stir. She only sat, eyes locked on the mirror, as if facing an invisible enemy. Clara wanted to scream, to pull Eleanor from the abyss, but she could only retreat, helpless, watching the woman who was once Boston's flame slowly extinguish. Outside, Boston lay gripped by March's bitter cold, fog cloaking the city like a veil hiding its secrets. In the frigid room, Eleanor remained still, trembling hands touching her face. She didn't know Mercury was killing her. She only knew her body was betraying her, her mind unraveling, and the mask of power, once her strength, was now the culprit pushing her to the brink. She closed her eyes, her breath faint. Deep within, she felt a chilling truth. Her decline wasn't just a woman's, but an era's. And that invisible killer, she knew, would not stop until her final breath faded away. On March 15, 1850, the darkened chamber in the Massachusetts State House bore witness to Eleanor Hawthorne's final moment. The legendary governor, at 68, lay motionless on a black silk bed, her breaths faint as a winter breeze drifting through Boston. Her gaunt hands, once wielding the power of a city, now rested limp, Caleb Thornton's silver ring still glinting on her finger. As the last candle flickered out, Eleanor exhaled her final breath, leaving behind an immortal legacy, a thriving, united Boston, but also a haunting question for those left behind. Can a leader become legendary with a broken heart? Or is it that very pain that makes them eternal? Eleanor departed in silence. No church bells tolled, no crowds gathered at Faneuil Hall. Only Lady Clara, her closest confidant, knelt by the bed, clasping her hand with tear-filled eyes. Clara felt Eleanor's passing, not just of a person, but of an era. She gazed at Eleanor's face, now serene, free of the white powder that once masked her fragility. The wrinkles, the marks of time, were now testaments to a life of devotion and a shattered heart. Clara whispered, "You've done enough." But the words couldn't ease her own pain, the ache of losing the woman who was Boston's flame. Eleanor left no final words. She spoke not of a successor, wrote no last commands. The silence that once imprisoned her became her final legacy. But deep down, she knew Boston would endure. Power passed to Governor James Carver, a young, ambitious man, but lacking Eleanor's fire. Advisers, standing quietly in the cold corridor, murmured about the future. They feared, not for Carver, but for the void Eleanor left, a void no one could fill. She was more than a governor. She was Boston's soul, guiding the city through crises, divisions, and dark days. And now that soul was gone. Eleanor had sacrificed everything. She forsook love, family, simple joys to become the Queen of Boston. But the cost was a broken heart. The pain of Caleb Thornton, the dear friend she had to execute for betrayal in 1848, was a wound that never healed. She carried it, along with the silver ring he gave her, as a reminder of guilt and loss. Each glance at the ring brought Caleb back, not the traitor, but the man who shared dreams of a just Boston. Could I have done otherwise? She had asked herself, but the answer was only silence, weighing on her mind like a curse. That pain didn't just destroy her. It shaped her, forging a leader both mighty and fragile, invincible yet deeply wounded. She lived in the hearts of Boston's people, not as a cold monument, but as a human. They remembered her speeches at Faneuil Hall, her voice igniting hope. They recalled the nights she stayed awake, poring over documents, fighting to keep Boston united. But they also sensed her loneliness, a woman at the pinnacle of power, with no one by her side. When news of her death spread, Boston mourned quietly. No parades, no lavish ceremonies. Only candles lit in homes, whispered prayers, and silent tears. The people didn't weep for a governor. They wept for Eleanor, who carried the city on her shoulders, though her heart was broken. Eleanor didn't know, but her legacy would endure. Under her guidance, Boston had become a thriving city, where commerce flourished, culture bloomed, and factions found common ground. She built bridges, not just over the Charles River, but between people. She shielded Boston from division at the cost of her own happiness. James Carver would carry on, but he would stand on the foundation Eleanor laid. And in the years to come, people would tell her story, not just as the Queen of Boston, but as a woman who fought, loved, and broke for her city. She lay there, in the dark room, her body now a shell of a departed soul. But in that silence, Eleanor left a lingering question. Can a leader be immortal with a broken heart? Or is it the pain, the unseen scars, that makes them legendary? For Eleanor, The answer lay in her legacy, a Boston strong yet human, like herself. She needed no crown to become eternal. Her pain, her sacrifice, and her love for Boston etched her name into history, a flame that never fades. Clara, still kneeling by the bed, gently touched Eleanor's forehead, feeling the chill of her skin. She wiped away a final tear, whispering, "You are free." Outside, Boston awoke in the fog, unaware that the city's soul had departed. But in every street corner, every cobblestone, Eleanor's legacy lived on, a reminder that legends are not born of power, but of a heart, though broken, burning bright until the final breath. Beneath the vast sky of the Great Plains, where wild grasses stretch like the earth's tapestry, wild coffee beans quietly sprouted in the soil's embrace. Thousands of years ago, the Lakota and Cheyenne, people of the prairie, found them amid sparse forests, small but imbued with sacred power. To them, coffee beans were not mere sustenance. They were a gift from ancestors, a bridge between humanity and spirits, an invisible thread tying their hearts to the cosmos. In moonlit rituals, the bitter drink, blended with roots and honey, passed the lips of shamans, carrying prayers and profound memories, like a song that never fades. The Lakota called the coffee bean Wope-Sha, seed of Mother Earth. They believed each bean was a drop of the earth's and sky's essence, sent to guide them through long days on the plains. In their minds, the bean was not just matter. It was spirit, memory, life itself. Shamans, with long braided hair and fathomless eyes, sat around fires, carefully roasting beans on heated stones. Fragrant smoke rose, curling like ancestral whispers, blending with the cold night air. They ground the beans into fine powder, mixed with roots and honey, creating a bitter, rich drink. With each sip, they felt power course through their veins, not physical strength, but spiritual, as if communing with departed souls. The ritual was the community's heart. Under silvery moonlight, the Lakota and Cheyenne gathered around the fire, drumbeats echoing steadily, like the earth's pulse. Shamans lifted clay bowls, pouring the sacred coffee, each drop falling like a prayer for harvests, health, harmony. They drank slowly, eyes closed, breaths mingling with the fire's smoke. In that moment, they were more than human. They were part of the cosmos, linked to ancestors, to the earth and sky, to stories told since the first sun rose. The drink didn't just nourish the body. It fed the soul, kindling faith that they were never alone. To the Lakota and Cheyenne, coffee beans were also a symbol of exchange, of life. They carried them in small leather pouches, tied tightly at their waists, as if bearing Mother Earth's blessings. In tribal markets, coffee beans became currency. A handful could trade for deer hide, a few for a stone knife. But their value transcended the material. Each exchange wasn't just of beans. It was of trust, respect, and an unspoken vow that the community would remain bound. An old shaman, his face weathered by time, once said the coffee bean was the heart of the earth, and whoever carried it bore the ancestors' strength. His words sank deep into their minds, a song passed from generation to generation. In their hearts, coffee was more than a drink. It was ritual, memory, a link to the holiest things. Shamans, sipping coffee, believed they could glimpse the future, hear ancestors' voices, feel the earth's heartbeat. They sat under twinkling stars, hands clutching clay bowls, breaths blending with the drink's warmth. Each sip was a journey, not across the plains, but through time, through tales of those who came before. They saw ancestors hunting, battles against storms, long nights of storytelling by fires. Coffee to them was a way to preserve those memories, ensuring the ancestors' voices were never forgotten. But coffee was also a burden. Shamans knew its power couldn't be misused. They selected each bean carefully, using them only for sacred occasions, rain ceremonies, thanksgivings, or when a warrior passed forever. They feared that misuse would strip coffee of its soul, reducing it to something mundane, no longer tying them to the cosmos. They guarded it as they guarded their identity. A young shaman, eyes alight with fervor, once asked, "If we lose coffee, what will we lose?" His teacher, hair white as snow, replied simply, "We will lose ourselves." Those words, stark yet heavy, etched into his mind, a reminder that coffee was not just a seed. It was heritage, the heart of the Lakota and Cheyenne. Under the Great Plains moonlight, the coffee ritual endured, an unending song. The Lakota and Cheyenne, hearts full of faith, raised clay bowls, sipping the bitter brew. They didn't know that, centuries later, those beans would leave the plains, entering a strange world where they'd be transformed, commercialized, forgotten as a sacred gift. But in that moment, under a star-filled sky, coffee was everything. Ancestors, earth, their soul. And in each bitter drop, they found solace, faith, and strength to carry on, no matter how the world might change. In the Arizona desert, where the sun scorches red sand and winds sing ancient songs, the Navajo found strength in tiny coffee beans. Under a boundless blue sky, they elevated these beans into a symbol of life, an invisible thread binding human hearts to the earth, sky, and gods. In healing ceremonies, as darkness enveloped clay hogans, coffee beans were poured as sacred offerings, carrying prayers and fierce faith. To the Navajo, coffee was not just a drink. It was the soul of the cosmos, the energy of Mother Earth, a way to touch the eternal within their spirits. The Navajo called the coffee bean Wehechmong-e, seed of strength. They believed each bean was a jewel gifted by the earth and sky, holding the energy of the sun, wind, and rare desert rains. In their hearts, coffee symbolized resilience. Like themselves, survivors of storms and Arizona's harsh heat, the Hatawi, healing shamans with deep eyes and calloused hands, carefully selected each bean as if choosing prayers. Inside hogans, firelight danced on earthen walls as they roasted beans on heated stones. The rich aroma rose, curling like spirits, blending with the dry desert night. The healing ceremony was the core of Navajo culture. When someone fell ill, it wasn't just their body needing care, but their soul. The Hatawi gathered, their low melodic chants rippling like water through the desert. They ground coffee beans into fine powder, mixed with herbs and spring water, creating a bitter, potent drink. This wasn't drunk hastily. It was poured slowly into wooden bowls carved with sun motifs, each drop falling like a whisper from the gods. The sick sipped carefully, eyes closed, letting the bitterness spread, as if absorbing the strength of the cosmos. In that moment, they were no longer individuals. They were part of the universe, entwined with ancestors, with stories told since the desert was a sea. Coffee beans, to the Navajo, were treasure. They stored them in leather pouches embroidered with patterns, kept in sacred corners of hogans, as if safeguarding their very souls. Each bean was a promise that the earth and sky would never abandon them, that ancestral strength would always guide. In offering ceremonies, as the sun rose over the Chuska Mountains, Hatawi lifted coffee pouches, presenting them in gratitude. They scattered a few beans on the ground, returning Mother Earth's gift, praying for rain, crops, harmony. This faith wasn't just religion. It was a way of life, a way to face the desert's harshness without yielding. In the Hatawi's minds, coffee carried the energy of the cosmos. They believed drinking it let them hear the wind's stories, see the sun's guiding light, feel Mother Earth's pulse. An elder Hatawi, hair white as snow, voice deep as stone, once said, "Coffee is the breath of the universe. It reminds us we are never alone." His words sank into Navajo hearts, a song passed through generations. They didn't drink coffee for alertness or sustenance. They drank to remember. Ancestors, the cosmos, themselves. Each sip was a spiritual journey, carrying them through tales of those who came before, through dreams that never faded. But coffee was also a responsibility. The Hatawi knew its power demanded respect. They used coffee only in ceremonies, fearing its sacredness would vanish like a forgotten song. They taught their children how to roast, mix, pray before drinking. A young girl, hands still soft, once asked, "Why must we keep coffee sacred?" Her grandmother, eyes bright as stars, replied, "Because it is our heart. If we lose it, we lose ourselves." Those words, simple yet heavy, silenced the girl, who felt the weight of her heritage on her shoulders. In desert nights, as winds howled through canyons, the coffee ceremony endured. Hatawi sat around fires, chants echoing, mingling with coffee's fragrant smoke. They raised wooden bowls, sipping with hands trembling from reverence. They didn't know that, centuries later, coffee would leave the desert, entering a foreign world where it would be transformed, forgotten as a sacred offering. But in that moment, coffee was everything: the cosmos, ancestors, the Navajo soul. And in each bitter drop, they found solace, strength, and faith to face the desert, no matter how the world might change. On the banks of the Hudson River, where waves shimmered under the sun, European explorers set foot in New York in the 17th century, driven by dreams of conquest and curious gazes. They stood in awe, watching the native people, children of the land, raise sacred coffee bowls in rituals, fragrant smoke curling like prayers ascending to the sky. The coffee bean, small yet potent, stirred their hearts, not for its taste, but for the mystery of an alien world. They carried the beans back to Europe, unaware that what was once the soul of the natives would become a luxury in the salons of London and Paris, marking a heartbreaking shift from sacred ritual to a symbol of power and wealth. The Europeans, clad in silk cloaks and polished leather boots, arrived in New York on wooden ships brimming with ambition. They didn't understand the natives' tongue, but the language of ritual needed no words. At fireside gatherings, they saw natives pour coffee from clay bowls, eyes deep as if peering through time. The rich aroma of coffee, blended with herbs and honey, seeped into their minds, stirring a strange blend of reverence and desire. They didn't grasp that, to the natives, coffee was a bridge to ancestors, the breath of the cosmos. They saw only novelty, a treasure to carry home, where nobles craved the wonders of the New World. The explorers, hands trembling with excitement, gathered coffee beans, carefully wrapping them in coarse cloth sacks, as if carrying a piece of New York's soul. They crossed the ocean, delivering the beans to London and Paris, where aristocrats greeted them with eager eyes. But the natives' coffee, bitter and sacred, didn't suit European palates. They didn't want the bitterness that recalled the land's harshness or rituals evoking a world they couldn't comprehend. They craved sweetness, luxury, control. So, cane sugar, the white gold of slave plantations, was stirred in, transforming coffee into a smooth, seductive, fashionable drink. In gilded salons, silver cups gleamed. Coffee was no longer a prayer. It was a symbol of power, wealth, a Europe rising to dominate the world. To the aristocrats, coffee was a trophy. They sipped it, lounging on velvet chairs, their haughty gazes drifting over wall-hung paintings. Each sip was a declaration. They had conquered the New World, turned another's sacred into their own. They didn't think of the natives, of moonlit rituals, of shamans raising coffee bowls with reverence. They didn't consider the earth, ancestors, or stories told through firelight. To them, coffee was for enjoyment, for boasting, for asserting status. They didn't know that, by sweetening it with cane sugar, they stripped its soul, turning a song into a commodity. Yet, deep within, coffee bore a wordless sorrow. It lay silent in silver cups, like a captive spirit, longing for its days on the Great Plains and Arizona deserts. It remembered the calloused hands of shamans, prayers echoing under stars, the pulse of Mother Earth. The aristocrats felt none of this. They saw only luxury, novelty, allure. But coffee, though transformed, held a trace of memory, a memory they couldn't touch or understand. Each sip, though sweetened, carried a hint of bitterness, a reminder that it was once sacred, the heart of a people. In the salons of London and Paris, coffee became the centerpiece of conversation. Ladies in silk gowns whispered of its exotic taste. Gentlemen in velvet coats debated its commercial potential. They didn't know that, to sweeten their coffee, millions of enslaved people bled and sweated on Caribbean plantations. They didn't know that, to obtain the beans, the natives' sacred rituals were being forgotten, replaced by ships laden with ambition. They only knew coffee was theirs, to savor, to own. But coffee, in its silence, carried the pain of those who lost it, and of those who would never know its sanctity. A young lady in a Paris salon raised her coffee cup, took a sip, and smiled. "Exquisite," she said, eyes sparkling. But in that moment, she saw only luxury. She didn't see the moonlit rituals, hear the shaman's songs, or feel the earth's pulse. She didn't know that the coffee, though sweet in her cup, was weeping, for a lost world, for a forgotten soul. She only knew it was delicious, fashionable, hers. But coffee, with its silent heart, knew it didn't belong to her. It belonged to Mother Earth, to ancestors, to those who raised it with reverence. Under Europe's dazzling chandeliers, coffee embarked on a new journey. No longer a ritual, a bridge to the cosmos. It was a commodity, a symbol of power, a delight for the elite. But in every bean, every sip, it carried a whisper of New York, of fireside rituals, of an era when it was the soul of the land. And though transformed, sweetened, owned, coffee waited for a day when someone might hear its story, understand it was not just a drink but the legacy of a people. Beneath Louisiana's scorching sun and the Caribbean's salt-laced winds, coffee plantations stretched like endless fields, but a silent darkness lurked beneath the green leaves. Millions of enslaved Africans, shackled and torn from their homelands, poured sweat and blood into foreign soil, turning coffee beans into Europe's black gold. While Boston's elite sipped coffee from gleaming silver cups, chatting about fashion and luxury, the hands that harvested those beans never touched their yield. Coffee, once a sacred gift of the earth, now bore a bitter legacy of injustice, etched into the hearts of the forgotten. In Louisiana's plantations, the air hung heavy with the crack of whips and stifled groans. Enslaved people, eyes dulled by exhaustion, stood among coffee trees, hands swiftly picking ripe red cherries. Each cherry was a drop of sweat, a painful heartbeat, a stolen dream. They didn't know what coffee was, how it was roasted, or that it flowed into silver cups in Boston's salons. They knew only work, from dawn to dusk, under blistering heat and the cold stares of overseers. In their hearts, hope was absent. Only fear remained, fear of the lash, of hunger, of a day they wouldn't wake from. They had no names, no families, no freedom. They were tools, stripped of humanity to feed the ambitions of a distant world. Ayo, an enslaved man who once dreamed of being a warrior in his homeland, now bowed under the shade of coffee trees. His calloused hands and scarred back told tales of senseless beatings. He remembered his mother, nights of stories under a baobab tree, his sister's laughter. But those memories faded, like moonlight obscured by clouds. Ayo didn't know where the coffee he picked went. He didn't know it sweetened conversations in London or adorned tables in Paris. He knew only that each cherry was a day survived, a step closer to death, or freedom, a dream he no longer dared to hold. In his mind, coffee wasn't sacred. It was chains, pain, an unbreakable curse. Meanwhile, in Boston, the elite gathered in salons, chandeliers casting light on silver cups. They sipped coffee, smiled, and discussed trade and culture. "So enchanting," a lady remarked, her silk dress rustling as she lifted her cup. They didn't see Ayo. They didn't see the scars, the sweat, the shattered dreams. They didn't know each sip was a drop of blood from millions like him. To them, coffee was luxury, joy, a symbol of wealth. They didn't taste the true bitterness, not of the bean, but of injustice, of lives stolen to sweeten their pleasure. The soaring demand for coffee turned it into a merciless machine. Caribbean plantations, with fertile soil and ideal climates, became hubs of suffering. Slave ships crossed the Atlantic, carrying millions of Africans, ripping them from families, cultures, humanity. On those ships, they lay stacked in darkness, breaths mingling with moans and the stench of death. Survivors faced a worse fate in the Caribbean, working to death on plantations, where each day was a fight to exist. They harvested coffee, grew cane, but never tasted either. To them, the world was a prison, and coffee was the key, not to freedom, but to suffering. Io, like millions, carried a wordless pain. He didn't know coffee was once sacred, cherished by the Lakota and Navajo as a gift from the earth. He didn't know that, in another world, it was a bridge to ancestors, a song of Mother Earth. To him, coffee was the enemy, the reason for his chains, a reminder he was no longer human. Yet, deep within, he held a faint spark of hope, small, fragile, like a flame flickering in a storm. He dreamed of freedom, of returning home, of telling his story. But that dream, he knew, might never come true. In a Boston salon, a gentleman raised his coffee cup, eyes gleaming as he spoke of trade profits. "Coffee will make us rich," he laughed, unaware that each sip was a curse from Ao and others like him. The elite didn't see the plantation's darkness, hear the whip's cracks, or feel the pain of the hands that picked the beans. They saw only sweetness, luxury, power. But coffee, in its silence, carried the stories of the forgotten. It lay quiet in silver cups, a captive spirit, weeping for broken dreams, for lives stolen. Under the Caribbean sun, Ao kept picking coffee, hands trembling with fatigue. He didn't know that, centuries later, his story would be told, a reminder of coffee's dark side. He knew only that each cherry was a day survived, bearing both pain and hope. And in each one, he left a piece of his soul, a soul Boston's elite never saw, but one forever etched into coffee's bitter legacy. In the clamorous factories of 19th century Chicago, steam and the scent of roasting coffee melded, crafting a new anthem for the industrial age. Coffee beans, once sacred gifts of native peoples, now coursed through steel machines, roasted, ground, and canned at breakneck speed. Modern techniques and coffee makers turned it into a mass-market drink, gracing kitchens from New York to San Francisco. But amid the roar of machinery, coffee's soul, its spiritual roots revered by the Lakota, Navajo, and Caribbean enslaved, faded, replaced by the convenience of Maxwell House tins. Coffee was no longer a bridge to the cosmos. It was a commodity, part of the relentless churn of a changing world. Chicago, with its skyscrapers and bustling crowds, became the heart of this new coffee industry. In factories, workers stood by conveyor belts, eyes weary but hands swift, pouring beans into massive roasters. Metal clanged, rich aromas filled the air, but no one paused to reflect. They didn't know coffee was once cherished in rituals, offered to gods, or harvested by scarred hands of enslaved people. To them, coffee was work, a long day, a meager wage, a cog in the vast machine turning the world into a place where everything could be bought. To them, coffee had no soul. It was a product measured in pounds, packed in shiny tin cans labeled Maxwell House. The brand, promising bold flavor, dominated markets, appearing on breakfast tables of millions. A Chicago housewife, in a green apron and high-bun hair, opened a tin, scooping coffee into a brewer, eyes bright at the thought of breakfast for her family. She didn't know of the Lakota, the Navajo shamans, or Io, the enslaved man who picked coffee dreaming of freedom. She knew only that coffee was convenient, brightening mornings, a staple of modern life. But with each sip, she unknowingly drank a forgotten history of blood, sweat, and unheard prayers. Industrialization changed coffee forever. Modern roasting techniques, perfected in Chicago's factories, delivered uniform, pleasing flavors suited to mass tastes. Coffee makers, with gleaming copper pipes and hissing steam, appeared in diners, turning brewing into a swift art. Gone were rituals, clay bowls, moonlit smoke curling skyward. Coffee was now part of a rushed lifestyle, 12-hour workdays, a world where time was money. To people, it was no longer sacred. It was fuel, keeping them alert, a product neatly stored in kitchen tins. But coffee, in its silence, bore a profound sorrow. It lay quiet in tin cans, a captive spirit, longing for days on the Great Plains when the Lakota raised it with reverence. It remembered Arizona's deserts, where the Navajo poured it as an offering to the cosmos. It recalled Caribbean plantations, where Io and millions bled to harvest it. Now, it was a convenient commodity, mass-produced, sold cheaply. Yet each bean held a trace of memory, a memory the Chicago housewife and factory worker could never touch. Each sip, though delicious, carried a hint of bitterness, a reminder that it was once sacred, the heart of a people. The housewife, brewing coffee, didn't think of history. She thought of today: breakfast, chores, family. She didn't see shamans roasting beans on stones, hear Navajo chants in hogans, or feel Io's pain under the Caribbean sun. She saw only convenience, simplicity, modernity. But the coffee in her cup held an untold story. It wept, not with tears, but with silence, for a lost world, a forgotten soul. She sipped, smiled, and said, "So good." But she didn't know each sip was a silent curse, the legacy of those who sacrificed for the coffee in her cup. In Chicago's diners, coffee makers hissed, pouring glossy black streams. Patrons in wool coats and felt hats sipped, discussing politics, weather, the future. They didn't know coffee was once a ritual, an offering, blood and sweat. They knew only that it was cheap, tasty, part of life. But coffee, in its silence, carried the stories of those erased from history. It waited for a day when someone might hear its voice, understand it was not just a drink, but a legacy of pain and faith. Under Chicago's neon glow, coffee forged a new path. No longer the earth's song or a link to ancestors, it was a commodity, fuel, a symbol of modernity. But in every bean, every sip, it held a whisper of distant days when it was the soul of the Lakota, Navajo, and Caribbean enslaved. And though industrialized, canned, forgotten, coffee still murmured, murmuring of an era when it was not just a drink, but the heart of a people. At Seattle's gentle dawn, the rich aroma of coffee wafts from cozy shops, where lines form for glossy black cups to kickstart the day. Coffee, once a sacred gift of native peoples, has become the soul of American culture, weaving through city corners from Manhattan's packed offices to New Orleans' vibrant festivals. But beneath its alluring flavor lingers a persistent shadow. The global coffee industry, though dazzling, bears scars of child labor and deforestation in Central America. In the hearts of coffee lovers, a craft movement rises, yearning to restore ethical roots, honoring the bean as a cultural legacy, not just a drink, but a story of earth and humanity. Coffee is America's pulse. In Seattle, a young barista with high-tied hair and a green apron pours coffee into a paper cup, smiling as she hands it to a customer. She's not just selling coffee. She's selling a moment, clarity for a hectic morning, a small joy amid life's rush. To her, coffee is a companion, linking her to strangers passing her counter. She doesn't think of Central American forests raised or gaunt children picking beans under scorching sun. She knows only that coffee is life's fabric, making her day and her customers worth living. But in each cup she brews, she unknowingly carries a complex history, a tale of joy and suffering, culture and injustice. In Manhattan's brightly lit offices, coffee is fuel. A banker in a black suit, eyes ringed with fatigue, sips from a thermos, gaze fixed on a computer screen. He doesn't ponder its origins. He doesn't know the beans in his cup may have been picked by a child in Guatemala, tiny hands calloused from dawn labor. He knows only that coffee powers him through 12-hour days, keeping him alert amid numbers and pressure. To him, coffee is a tool, part of the modern grind. But coffee, in its silence, carries the pain of those who grew it, a pain he never touches. Coffee is everywhere, from Mardi Gras in New Orleans, poured into plastic cups amid jazz, to quiet suburban mornings, where a mother brews it in her kitchen, watching her kids play outside. It's a symbol of connection, joy, American culture. But behind the glamour lies darkness. In Central America, tropical forests are felled for coffee plantations, erasing homes of countless species and native lands. Children, barely 10, toil on plantations, eyes dulled by exhaustion, small hands picking beans for pennies. To them, coffee isn't joy. It's a burden, the reason they miss school, can't dream. Coffee for them is a curse, not of the earth, but of a world craving it. Yet in that darkness, a glimmer stirs. The craft coffee movement, born from passionate coffee lovers in Seattle and San Francisco, seeks to rewrite the story. These artisans, with fervent hearts and meticulous hands, yearn to restore coffee's ethical roots. They travel to Central America, meeting farmers, hearing their tales. A young artisan, eyes alight, stands in a Costa Rican plantation, clasping an elderly farmer's hand. "We want your coffee's story told," he says, voice trembling with emotion. To him, coffee isn't just a drink. It's heritage, the story of its growers, a way to heal injustice's scars. This movement honors coffee as cultural legacy. They source beans from small farms, pay fair prices, ensure no child labor or deforestation. They roast by hand in small batches, preserving the earth's flavors. In craft cafes, they share each cup's story, about the farmer who grew it, the forest that nurtured it, the journey from Central America to Seattle. A customer sips, hears the tale, and feels a shift. He's not just drinking coffee. He's drinking history, faith, hope. To him, coffee is no longer a commodity. It's a bridge, not to ancestors like the Navajo, but to living people fighting for a just world. Coffee, on its global journey, carries both light and shadow. It's America's joy, the soul of mornings, but also the pain of Central American children, a scar on Mother Earth. The craft movement, with open hearts, strives to reconcile these worlds. They can't erase the past, not Ayo's blood, not the Lakota's rituals, but they can shape the future. A future where coffee isn't just a drink, but a legacy of humanity, earth, and stories never forgotten. At Seattle's sunset, the cafe closes, lights dimming. The barista wipes the counter, smiling, thinking of tomorrow. She doesn't know the last cup she poured carries centuries of stories, of rituals, suffering, hope. But deep down, she senses coffee is part of something greater. And in each glossy black drop, coffee still whispers, whispering of a world where it's not just a drink, but the heart of humanity. Beneath the ancient canopies of the Appalachian Mountains, where sunlight filtered through like golden tears, a harrowing journey began in 1835. The Indian Removal Act, signed with the cold ink of politicians, forced the Shawnee, Lenape, and Seneca tribes to abandon their homelands in Ohio and Kentucky, trudging across rugged paths to Oklahoma. This forced march, later called the Trail of Tears, was no mere journey. It was a gaping wound carved into the hearts of thousands of native people, where hunger, cold, and disease stole their lives, leaving a legacy of sorrow etched forever in American history. The Shawnee, Lenape, and Seneca, people of the land, carried pride in their homelands. The vibrant autumn forests of Ohio, the moonlit rivers of Kentucky. They didn't just live on the land. They were the land, the trees, the rivers. To them, each hill held a story. Each stream sang an ancestral song. But one spring day in 1835, soldiers arrived, blue coats gleaming, bayonets flashing, pounding on wooden homes. "Leave," they commanded, voices sharp as steel. Families were dragged out, trembling hands clutching children, eyes wild with anguish as they gazed at familiar forests. They didn't understand. Why was Mother Earth, their birthplace, being stolen? Why must they abandon their ancestors' graves, memories rooted in every tree? The Appalachian Trail was no journey. It was a crucible of suffering. Thousands, from infants to elders, staggered through mud and jagged rocks under a gray winter sky. Hunger clung to them, a relentless specter. Meager cornbread, shared in silence, couldn't sustain shivering bodies. Frozen rivers offered no water, and disease spread swiftly, whooping cough, measles, malaria, claiming lives. A Shawnee mother, hair tightly braided, eyes red with grief, cradled her small child, singing a lullaby against the biting wind. But her song faltered as the child's breath weakened, then stopped. She buried her baby by the roadside in a shallow grave, unmarked save for a few twigs. Her heart shattered, yet she walked on, for her other children still needed her. To them, the Trail of Tears was a waking nightmare. The Lenape, once proud of thriving villages by the Ohio River, now bowed under icy rain, barefoot and bleeding on stones. They remembered fireside tales, harvest dances. Now there was only silence, not of peace, but despair. A Seneca warrior, face hardened, eyes like steel, gripped a wooden staff, walking to shield his family. He said nothing, but inside, he screamed. He yearned to turn back, to fight, to hold his ancestors' land. Yet the soldiers' bayonets and his loved one's fate forced him to yield. The pain wasn't just losing home. It was humiliation, the sense of being erased from their own history. Thousands perished on the Trail of Tears. Children collapsed in snow, elders succumbed to cold, and mothers, hearts broken, pressed on with faint hope that Oklahoma might offer life. But they knew that hope could be a mirage. Soldiers, faces impassive, prodded them faster, allowing no pause to bury the dead. Shallow graves lined the path, nameless, unmarked, a reminder they were forgotten by the world. To survivors, each step was a prayer, not for themselves, but for the fallen, for dreams buried in cold earth. The Shawnee, Lenape, and Seneca carried a wordless pain. They lost not just land, but identity, memories, fireside stories. An elderly Lenape woman, hair silver, hands trembling, clutched a beaded necklace, a gift from her mother. It was her last tie to home, a thread to her past. She whispered, voice frail, "Mother Earth will remember us." But deep down, she feared the earth might forget, that Ohio's rivers would cease their songs. That fear, more than hunger or disease, was the heaviest burden on the Trail of Tears. The Appalachian Mountains, with towering peaks and deep valleys, stood witness to the tragedy. Winds howled through gorges like the cries of restless spirits. The native people walked, feet bleeding, hearts shattered, yet their eyes held a spark of resilience. They knew, though forced to leave, they were still children of the earth and sky. They carried songs, stories, beliefs, not in bags, but in their souls. And though the Trail of Tears stole thousands of lives, it couldn't steal their will to survive, to tell their story. Reaching Oklahoma, survivors found no promised land, just barren, alien soil, devoid of ancestral breath. But in their hearts, the Trail of Tears didn't end. It lived on, a scar that wouldn't heal, a reminder of injustice, loss, but also resilience. They didn't know their story would be retold centuries later, a song of human strength against adversity. They knew only that each step on the trail was a vow they wouldn't be forgotten, that Mother Earth, though distant, still heard their hearts. Under the fiery sunset of Ohio's forests, Chief Mawek stood silent, his deep eyes fixed on the horizon where the Shawnee homeland faced its doom. In 1835, the Indian Removal Act struck like a blade, forcing his tribe to abandon their ancestral lands and cross the Appalachians to Oklahoma. But Mawek, with a blazing heart and iron will, refused to bow. He led the Shawnee to the Supreme Court, clinging to hope that justice would shield them. The crushing defeat under political pressure in 1838 shattered that dream, and over 3,000 Shawnee perished on the Trail of Tears. Yet amid the heartbreak, the Shawnee preserved their language, rituals, and unyielding spirit, a flame that never dies, defying all odds. Mawek was more than a chief. He was the soul of the Shawnee, bearing pride in Mother Earth and ancestral memories. By the Scioto River village, he gripped a wooden staff carved with an eagle, symbol of strength and vision. To him, every tree, every stream held a story of warriors hunting, mothers singing lullabies, nights of tales by firelight. When soldiers arrived, blue coats gleaming, bayonets flashing, ordering departure, Mawek felt a pain like a knife's cut. "This is our land," he wanted to roar, but he knew native voices didn't echo in white men's courts. Still, he didn't yield. He chose reason, justice, though the path was thorned. Mawek led a Shawnee delegation to Washington, entering the Supreme Court with fragile hope. His hands, calloused from bowstrings, now clutched black-inked documents arguing Ohio's land was theirs, treaties broken. To him, this wasn't just a fight for land. It was for identity, for future generations, for stories that wouldn't fade. But political pressure, like a storm, swept hope away. The ruling turned against them. Mawek stood silent in the cold corridor, his eyes not of defeat, but of a quiet vow. The Shawnee would not vanish. They would endure, though paid in blood and tears. In 1838, the Trail of Tears began. Over 3,000 Shawnee died, claimed by hunger, cold, and disease. A young mother, hair tightly braided, eyes red with grief, cradled her small child, singing a lullaby through falling snow. But the child's breath weakened, then stopped. She buried her baby by the roadside, trembling hands digging frozen earth, no headstone, only a twig for a marker. Her heart shattered, yet she walked on, for the living needed her. A Shawnee warrior, face stern, gripped a dagger, eyes ablaze. He yearned to turn back, to fight, but his elderly mother's pleading gaze forced him forward. The pain wasn't just losing home, it was humiliation, the sense of being erased from their own Mother Earth. To them, the Trail of Tears was a relentless nightmare. They trudged through mud, over sharp rocks, under a gray sky. Hunger gnawed their bodies, disease stole loved ones. Yet in their pain, they found strength. An elderly Shawnee woman, hair silver, voice faint, told stories by a small fire, her tone trembling but resolute. "We are children of the earth," she said, clutching an ancestral beaded necklace. Those tales of warriors, harvests, Mother Earth warmed them in the cold. They sang, voices hoarse. They prayed, hearts broken. They guarded their language, each word a jewel, refusing to let it fade. Mawek, though he didn't survive the full trail, remained their guiding banner. Before disease claimed him, he sat by a fire, eyes fierce, gazing at his people. "Never forget who we are," he whispered, voice deep as earth. His words sank into their souls, a sacred oath. Reaching Oklahoma's barren, alien soil, they found no promised land. But they found each other. They rebuilt shelters, sang old songs, retold stories. The Shawnee language still rang out, rituals endured, though under a foreign sky. Their resilient spirit, the flame Mawek kindled, never faltered. To the Shawnee, the Trail of Tears was not just loss, it was proof of their strength. They lost land, loved ones, but not identity. A young girl, raised in Oklahoma, held a book written in Shawnee, eyes bright. She didn't know Mawek, didn't see the trail, but she felt him in every word, ritual, story her grandmother told. To her, the Shawnee weren't defeated. They lived, through language, ceremonies, a will-defying hardship. She whispered, voice trembling with pride, "We are still here." The Appalachians, with towering peaks, still bear the trail's marks. Winds howl through gorges like cries of restless spirits. But in every Shawnee song, every ritual, they live again. The Shawnee didn't know their story would echo centuries later, a song of justice, resilience, a people unbroken. They knew only that, though the trail stole thousands, it couldn't steal their heart. A heart that still sings, still tells, still defies all odds. In the damp alleys of New Orleans in 1890, where jazz horns mingled with the musty scent of the Mississippi River, a legal frenzy erupted like a fire devouring reason. Children, with wild eyes and piercing screams, pointed accusing fingers at immigrants and the poor, claiming supernatural crimes, whispers of magic, curses, shadows in the night. 20 innocent people were dragged into unjust trials, where collective fear overwhelmed justice, making them victims of a city haunted by its own darkness. But as the fever subsided, New Orleans awoke, leaving a painful lesson about justice, the devastation of fear, and the power of reflection, etched into the hearts of those who witnessed it. New Orleans, with its wrought iron balconies and flickering lamps, was a city of joy and mystery. But in 1890, that joy was shrouded by an invisible fear. It began with the children, boys and girls in tattered clothes, playing in the French Quarter's alleys. One day, they changed. They screamed, writhed, eyes darting as if seeing phantoms adults couldn't. "They hurt me!" a girl shrieked, pointing at an Italian immigrant, a poor street vendor. In their young minds, the fear was real, a formless monster, a supernatural curse. But that fear, fed by ghostly tales and social tensions, was no child's game. It was the spark for a storm that would engulf the city. Adults believed them, not because of evidence, but because fear had crept into their hearts. New Orleans, a melting pot of Creole, Italian, and African cultures, buzzed with rumors of magic and curses. Amid inflation, poverty, and racial strife, people sought scapegoats. Immigrants, Italian fruit sellers, Creole seamstresses, became targets. The poor, crammed in rotting wooden shacks, were deemed threats. To the townsfolk, these people weren't just different. They were dangerous, embodiments of a supernatural darkness haunting the city. A mother, eyes frantic, clutched her child, whispering, "They're cursing us." That fear, like a wave, swept New Orleans into madness. The trials began, but they were not justice. In stifling courtrooms, with slow spinning ceiling fans and dusty sunlight streaming through windows, 20 innocents faced judgment. An Italian vendor, hands calloused, voice trembling, stood before the judge, eyes pleading. "I did nothing," he said, but his words were drowned by children's screams. "He's a witch!" a boy wailed, writhing on the floor. To the vendor, the trial was a nightmare. He couldn't fathom why he was accused, why children who once bought his candy now saw him as a monster. The pain wasn't just injustice, It was humiliation, the sense of being erased from the community he called home. A Creole woman, hair tightly braided, eyes defiant, was also hauled to court. A seamstress who stitched gowns for wealthy ladies, she now stood accused of cursing children with magic. In her heart, fear mixed with rage. She wanted to scream, to tell of late-night sewing, of meager coins feeding her family. But she stayed silent. She knew her words held no weight in a city that had lost its reason. When sentenced, she held her head high, her gaze not of defeat, but a silent challenge. You can cage me, but you can't erase me. That pain, like a smoldering fire, burned within her, though chains bound her wrists. 20 were wrongfully convicted. They had no evidence, no chance to defend themselves. In the courtroom, collective fear was judge, jury, and executioner. New Orleans citizens, once neighbors, now stood outside, muttering accusations. They didn't see people, they saw monsters. But deep down, some began to doubt. A father, hands rough from carpentry, watched his daughter accuse a neighbor. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice shaking. The girl's eyes, wild and lost, gave no answer. In his mind, a crack formed. He feared, not magic, but the truth that his city was destroying itself. The legal fever faded, but not easily. As the innocent languished in cells, some priests and lawyers spoke out. They stood in churches, voices resounding, pleading for reason. "What are we doing to ourselves?" a priest asked, hands raised as if begging. In their hearts, pain mingled with hope, hope that New Orleans would awaken. And the city, slowly, listened. The trials halted. The convicted were freed, but the scars never healed. The Italian vendor returned, but his eyes held distrust. The Creole seamstress resumed sewing, but her smile was gone. To them, New Orleans was no longer home. It was a place that betrayed them. New Orleans awoke, but the lesson was a wound. The city learned that collective fear could devastate more than any curse, that justice couldn't stand when reason was clouded. A boy, once an accuser, grew up with regret. Standing by the Mississippi, eyes heavy with sorrow, he whispered, "I was wrong." In his heart, that pain was a reminder of reflection's power, the power to look back, to make amends, to avoid repeating the madness. New Orleans, with its jazz and lights, lived on. But in every alley, every street, the tale of the legal frenzy echoed, a song of justice, fear, and hope that humanity could be better. Tonight, we've journeyed through America's emotional chapters, from Eleanor Hawthorne's tragedy, coffee's bitter path, the trail of tears' sorrow, to New Orleans' frenzy. Each story is a scar, but also a resilient flame, reminding us of justice, compassion, and reflection's strength. They teach us history isn't just the past. It's a lesson for a better future, where no one is forgotten. People of America, let these stories touch your hearts, urging you to act, defend justice, honor heritage, hear the unheard. If you feel history's weight, like this video, subscribe and share this story with friends. Leave a comment. What do you think of these lessons, and where are you watching from? Let's keep history's flame burning so legacies like Eleanor's, the Shawnees, and New Orleans endure. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to comment where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always thrilling to see who's with us from around the globe. Comment 1 if you love the story so we can bring you more.